All right, welcome back to the JFK assassination audit. This is video number 79. It's now 12 August. I apologize for not making a video for quite a while. I've had some computer problems. Basically, I'm running on a second-hand computer here, and I've also been working on another project, but I'm going to try to come back and make it a little more steady now. So, last time we were in Mexico City. I wanted to start off again with Mexico City because it's been a while, and I really like this topic. But we're going to pick it up again with David Atlee Phillips, Maurice Bishop, and he's testifying before the House Assassinations Committee, or maybe a committee right before the House Assassinations Committee. This might have been that CIA committee. Anyway, this is in November 27th, 1976. He's continuing to be questioned about Mexico City and Mexico Station, the CIA station there. All right, so Mr. Sprague, would you say the total number of intercepts, that it would be very small, where notifications would be made to the CIA headquarters in Washington? Mr. Phillips, relatively speaking, small, sir. Quite small. Mr. Sprague, would it be accurate to describe those small numbers as being something more involved than the normal intercept, something of a little more importance? Mr. Phillips, yes, sir, that is true. So basically, don't wake the boss unless it's something really, really important. Okay? Like strategically, globally important. Mr. Sprague, now, with regards to these tapes, there were recordings of the conversations. What was the procedure for these recordings to the tapes themselves? You have said that there was a transcription, and I have heard you say that they were carried from one place to another. What would end up and what would happen with these tapes? Mr. Phillips, all right, sir, remembering last night and the fact that these tapes were coming in, it is my best recollection now that the Soviet tapes would come in to be translated actually in the station somewhere, and that there was a translator in the station for the Soviet business. I recall thinking last night, I remember the name of the translator, and we used it to be in a poker club together, and I remember he worked in the office, which is interesting because I think he even said earlier that the tapes are actually translated at another location. Anyway, transcribed. Anyway, and what was his name? His name was George Misko. Misko? Uh-huh. Do you remember whether Misko was married or not? I know that he was married. I understood that he was not in Mexico, that Oswald was there, but I believe he was married. Yes, I'm not positive. What gave you the understanding that he was not in Mexico at the time that Oswald was there? Because I received a telephone call on the appearance of the Post story from the CIA asking me what I knew about the source of the information and so forth, and the translator and the secretary. And I said the only translator I can remember was George Misko. In a subsequent conversation, the fellow I talked to said, by the way, we understand George was not in Mexico at the time. That's why I remember. Mr. Sprague, who was it that called you? Mr. John Waller. Would you spell the last name? Waller. And who was John Waller? He's an officer at the CIA, and I talked to him on the same day about telling him what I was planning to come down and testify, and that consequently I considered myself released from the security oath. Now he is the Inspector General of the CIA. So you can see he's consulted with the CIA before he comes down and discusses with the committee. John Waller is? Yes. And did Waller ask you questions regard to the information in the Post story? He wanted to know if I knew where the information came from. Well, first answer my question. Did he ask your information concerning what was in the Post story? Yes, sir, the first. What did he ask you? The first question was, is that story the testimony which you gave to the Senate subcommittee of the Senators Schweiker and Hart? And I said, no, sir. And he said, do you know who the translator might be? And I said, the only name I remember of a translator is George Misko. What else did you ask you and say to you? That was it, sir. Were you advised by anyone from the CIA the secrecy agreement was still binding on you? I was told that technically, well, answer my question, were you advised? So it's interesting, they're going on and on and on about this translator, and what they're getting at is Oswald's phone calls to the Soviet embassy and to the Cuban embassy, of which Oswald spoke broken up Russian, calling the Russian embassy, and spoke in English, talking to the Cuban embassy. But they also may be interested in the Russians, the Soviet Union embassy call to the Cubans. But I believe they spoke in English or Spanish when they called there. Anyway, by anyone from the CIA that the secrecy agreement was still binding you? No, sir. Where were you advised? I was told that technically it was, but that it left it up to me, and I said, well, I know what I considered, but I was told that it was. That's kind of a roundabout non-answer answer there. So is the secrecy oath binding, or is it up to him? Or does he know that it was? Anyway. Now, when you say they, who else in the CIA was in touch with you other than Mr. Waller? Mr. Lyle Miller, he is an attorney. And what is Mr. Miller's role with the CIA? He is the Office of Legal Counsel, I believe, or Legislative Counsel, one or two, but he is a lawyer. So the CIA has a group of lawyers, not to keep them out of trouble, not to keep them from breaking the law, but to cover their ass legally when they're called before to testify on shit. Okay? So they don't try to put out fires. Well, they don't try to stop fires. They try to put out fires after they've been started. Anyway, what happened thereafter with regard to the contacts by the CIA? Mr. Sprague, I'm very interested. What do you mean when they say technically? Mr. Phillips, the explanations was that technically, because the staff was not formally received security clearances, that was the technicality. So he's talking about Misko didn't have security clearance, and his wife. I still don't understand. Is there an implied threat when they say technically? Oh, no, sir. See, to keep them from asking more questions, just keep them confused, and then they get stuck on this one thing, and they can't probe deeper. Anyway, none whatsoever. I informed them of my intention to come down, and answer was, well, technically you are not to be released from your secrecy oath, but you do what you want to, and I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Anyway, why would they bring up the word technically if they did not have some concern? I don't know, sir, but I didn't feel that it was a threat or asking me not to speak or anything. Why would it be mentioned at all, in your opinion? You're a veteran here. Were they cautioning you? I did not see it as a caution. I just think, sir, that it was because I had said that I was going to go down and testify freely, and said they were responding as bureaucrats do, but I really don't know, sir. So they were reminding him of certain things that he couldn't talk about. But he didn't want to say that, so he's letting them know that, oh no, they said I could talk about anything. So if you tell someone that, yeah, I couldn't talk about certain things, well, then it gets into, well, what was that you couldn't talk about? Well, I couldn't talk about this specific area. Well, why about that specific area? Well, because it may affect certain things dealing with security and da-da-da-da-da, and it just keeps digging a deep hole. So you basically let them know, you tell the truth in case they bring Mr. Waller down, but then you remind them that, oh, but, you know, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm not holding anything back. So they don't dig deeper. Mr. Phillip is a very sophisticated man. He's not like me and you where we see black and white, we talk in black and white, yes, no. He's kind of a circular round, yes, but maybe, no kind of guy. I hate people like that. You can't trust people like that. You never know. Even after after these senators have finished questioning him for hours, and we've got 139 pages. We're only on page 27. By the end of page 139, they're still not going to know much more than what they know when they started off on page 1. And that's designed that way on purpose. They hire only the best of the CIA. They're trained in how to speak with these people by the media guys and the legal advisors. And they're really good in speaking non-speak. I did not see it as a caution. I just think that it was because I'd said I was going down and testify freely, and they said they were responding as bureaucrats do, but I really don't know, sir. Mr. Sprague, after these conversations with these two CIA agents, what occasioned the next conversation with the CIA agent? Are we speaking of yesterday, sir? Yes. There were two conversations, I believe, Mr. Sprague. Did you say that this was the first subsequently called you back to tell you that the person that you named was not there at the time? Yes, I made the first call to Mr. Waller. A call came back from Mr. Waller, and there was the third and subsequent call from Mr. Waller, who had advised by Mr. Miller, who had been advised by Mr. Waller that I had called and said that I was coming down, so Mr. Miller, the lawyer, made the third call to me. You've got me mixed up, see? That's on purpose. Now, let's take these in order. When was the first contact by anyone? And see how they're getting nowhere? You see how this kind of brilliant type of non-speak works? Is that you spin them and you make them confused, and therefore they don't dig any further. Because that's what people do normally. They get frustrated, and by chasing the rabbit around, they get tired, and then, okay, it's time for a break, it's time for lunch, and then they move on to something else. This is a good way. See, we were talking about tapes earlier, about the tapes of Oswald, and what he said in Russian, and then what the Russians said to the Cubans. But notice we completely gone way off track, far away from that, and we're talking about stuff that means nothing and will solve nothing. And that's done on purpose. All right. I called the subcommittee. When? Shortly before lunch, and asked for Mr. Wen on the day the story appeared. Yesterday. And who did you ask for, Mr. Waller? And why were you calling him? Because he's an old personal friend. And did you want to discuss with him the story and your possible appearance? No, I wanted to go on the record that I, as I understood my duties before duly constituted committee, that I was to come down and that my secrecy oath did not apply in this case. And so I was advised to Mr. Waller. He later contacted Mr. Miller, and that presumably triggered Mr. Miller's call to me to talk about the secrecy agreement. So what Mr. Phillips is doing is covering his ass on both sides. He's covering his ass with the committee. He's saying, hey, I'm coming down here and going to answer all the questions, but I did call my bosses to make sure I wasn't covered by any secrecy oath. But I told them I was going to tell them everything. They asked for every question. And that rings alarm bells because remember, you've got the CIA that's still putting out fires because they know that some of their agents or ex-agents went rogue and killed the president, and they didn't know about it, weren't involved in it, but it was some of their guys or associated guys. So they're out there putting out brush fires and trying to keep everyone else in line with the same message that the CIA wasn't involved. But Mr. Bishop knows that he was one of the rogue agents, that he was involved. So he's slithering down between the CIA bureaucracy and the Senate bureaucracy and laughing all the way and playing one against the other and saying, hey, I'm going to tell them everything I know because they're going to ask me. And then he's telling the subcommittee, I'm going to answer any questions, but I did let them know, and they said, I'm still under oath, but, I'm still going to tell you everything I know. Very clever. Very, very clever. You're playing one bureaucracy paranoid against another organization of bureaucracy. And then you're like, hands up. Hey, I'm just an innocent party here, man. I didn't do anything. Meanwhile, they know at the CIA that you use them and use your department to kill the president of the United States, where they have a very damn good suspicion. But they can't say anything, okay, because then the whole shithole would come down on them because it was members of their group or ex-members of their group or people associated with their operations that are still possibly going on that they still want to continue, and they also still want to get retired and their pensions, okay? And by the way, Mr. Phillips is retired here, okay? And he's getting his pension. So he's not in a lot of fear. He also has a lot of money tucked away in Swiss bank accounts. So he's not very worried. I think he even dies a couple of years after this. Natural causes, of course. But very, very smart. I see exactly what he's doing. It makes perfect sense. Hey, they called me down. I'm going to tell them everything I know. Oh, no, don't tell them everything you know. Because if you tell everything we know, we don't know. We know what you did, but we're not covering your ass, okay? But if you tell them everything you know, you're going to bust our ass. So just remember, you're still under oath. And see, in the government, especially in intelligence and law enforcement, need to know and government secrecy and stuff like that is not usually used to protect state secrets. It's mostly used to cover people's asses for mistakes they made or indiscretions that they committed, illegal things they committed. That's usually why they invoke state security and shit like that. But they try to, hide behind it, patriotism and bullshit like that. But we all know it. We all know the deal. Anyway, Mr. Phillips, yes sir, and I also, to tell me something like they were going to tell me what to do. They weren't going to tell me what to do or anything like that. Excuse me, Mr. Sprague, but when they tell you technically, again, you're a 30-year veteran of the CIA, aren't they cautioning you to be very careful in your choice of my language, my language? why would he bring up the language? Well, no, it doesn't apply, but technically it does. Mr. Phillips, sir, I don't know, but it was in the context of let me know that they were not saying to me, don't go down and testify, and so that is why I did not see it as a threat. So again, they're covering their ass, he's trying to cover his ass. They don't want to be dragged before a committee or have their budgets cut because they refuse to let one of their employees testify. But he knows all this. I don't want to be very argumentative. Let's see here. Okay, I guess we're spinning. Hold on one second. But if they were going to be freely telling you to come down and testify, why would they bring up that word, which frankly concerns me? Sir, I don't know. To me, it was a veiled caution that the secrecy technically does apply to testimony you were giving us this morning. Wouldn't that be a reasonable interpretation? Sir, I didn't take it that way, and I intend to testify fully, so I didn't read it that way. Well, that of course is all important. Yes, sir. And in no way, form, or shape is that admonition influencing anything you're telling us here today. Absolutely not, sir. How long after the call that you had with the first person was it before the call came from Mr. Miller? The first time I called for Mr. Waller, I asked for him and he was at lunch, and I asked for him to call me. How long after you spoke to Mr. Waller was it before you then spoke to Mr. Miller? I recall it being about 30 minutes. And when you spoke to Mr. Miller, did he at the time advise you that Mr. Waller had said that the person you thought was the translator or the interpreter was not the person, or was that yet another call? No, sir. That was Mr. Waller in the conversation advising that. And that was in the third call? No, sir. That was in the second call with Mr. Waller. All right. Now, when was it the second call? As I understand what you said, you called Mr. Waller. He was not in. You left word, and Mr. Waller then called you back. After lunch, I would say about 2:45, 2:30, 3 o'clock. So, again, this is just absolutely wasting time. They could be moving on to other things, but they're still caught up in this thing here, whatever they're doing. He's got him trapped, spinning around, doing nothing, going nowhere. Yes, sir. And he asked you at that time, who did you think was the interpreter? That is right, sir. And you gave him the name? That's right, sir. Now, was it the same conversation that he told you that he checked and that person was not down in Mexico then? No, sir. It was about 20 to 30 minutes later. All right. That was my blank. He called back to me. And notice, out of 5 pages of this bullshit spinning around, they still haven't discovered who the translator was at the time that Mr. Phillips was there. Anyway, but that is what I want to find out after the conversation with Mr. Waller. And prior to your conversation with Mr. Miller, had Mr. Waller called you back again? Yes, sir. He called twice. So after the first conversation with Mr. Waller, then in approximately 20 minutes, Mr. Waller calls you again. Yes, sir. So it's real simple. He calls Mr. Waller. Mr. Waller's not in. Mr. Waller calls him back. He says, hey, about that article, I'm going to testify that I believe it was Mr. Munchi was the translator. He's going to say, I don't think that was correct, but let me check. He checks, he calls back and says, no, it was someone else different. And also, by the way, our legal department, Mr. Miller, is going to be calling you back. And then Mr. Miller calls him back. So anyway, God, these are grown adults just spinning around, letting this guy totally manipulate them. Anyway, yes, sir. And what did Mr. Waller tell you at the time, and what was the conversation about? God, this is ridiculous. I'd be pulling my hair out by now. He called to tell me that during that conversation, he mentioned a man's name that I had gathered was not stationed in Mexico, and he told me that he had passed on, and I believe he said to Mr. Miller the fact that I had called and said I was intended to testify because Mr. Waller was not necessarily the man that I would have called if I had known just the person to call, but I had known him, that person whom he notified, Mr. Miller, who is either the legislative or legal counsel's office, called me, which was the third call in the series and was all occurred in about an hour. So Mr. Miller basically is a lawyer that specializes in limiting what can be said to the press and to congressional committees. And he specializes in trying to limit that information. And a lot of times you're going to find a lot of time that they limit shit just for the hell of it. There's no top secret. Nothing's going to change. They always try to give as little information as possible. And see, as you can see here, Mr. Phillips is a master at this, at giving absolutely no information. We don't know who the other translator was. We're going on 5-10 pages. This is probably 15-20 minutes of knowing absolutely nothing more than we did from the beginning of the conversation. Actually, we probably know less. Other than Mr. Waller stating to you that the person you were naming, he was checked on and that person was not working in Mexico at the time. Yes, sir. And other than stating that he was referred this matter or turned it over to Mr. Miller, was anything else said by Mr. Waller in this conversation? I don't recall anything else, sir. Well, was he saying anything about not mentioning another party? Since he was just checked on one name that you mentioned and found that that person you said wasn't working there, was there anything along that line? He did say one other thing. He continued on that, which was, we don't think he was working there. That's the same thing. It was another fellow, but I won't say who that was because I don't want to confuse you or something like that. But I won't tell you who that is, and he didn't. Good Lord. And was anything said about their attempt to contact any of these other people? No, sir. When he said to you, in effect, that your information was incorrect, that he was not going to tell you the other person is, or another name, because it might confuse you, or would confuse you. I'm not sure. He used the word, I would jump forward and get through this, but he may say something, because this guy is so sly, that I missed that's important. Anyway, I'm going to stop here. We're at page 34. And we're going to go into this really good video from the Ask 1993 Oswald in Mexico City. It's got this Russian agent who's the station chief of counterintelligence in Mexico City. There's Mary Farrell and a couple other authors. But it's really good. We were watching this last time, and we will continue with this. And let me get the CC captioning on this. All right. So we'll continue. Hold on one second. That's how they're going to figure it out right there. Okay? And I just went over all this, and I didn't record it, so I have to do it again. So, hold on one second. So basically, like I said, like Tom Cruise, you see him get upset in a movie, he's angry, he's happy, he's sad. It's all acting. He's playing a role. It's not real. Okay? When you see Tom Cruise upset in a movie, he's not really upset. When you see him happy in a movie, he's not really happy. He's playing a role. Okay? So when they send Oswald down to Mexico City, because he was last seen in the offices of Maurice Bishop in Dallas, they send him down to Mexico City. They're having him play a role. Oswald's not being harassed by the FBI. Oswald never makes contact with the FBI or Agent Hosty while he's in Dallas. They know where he works. It's not impossible to find for the FBI to find out where someone works. It's not impossible, okay? Especially if you've made a paycheck, they've taken out taxes, and then they filed that with your Social Security number. So all they got to do is go down to the Texas Employment Commission, and they'll know exactly who his employer is. So it's not impossible to find Oswald. They've been told that Oswald is an undercover agent working for somebody and not to bother him. They're more interested in Marina. Matter of fact, when Oswald is intercepted in Dallas and he sees Agent Hosty, and Agent Hosty identifies himself as the FBI, he doesn't recognize Hosty. He doesn't know who Hosty is, but he's identified by Captain Fritz as being part of the FBI. That's when he gets upset, because he says, "You're the one who's been harassing my wife and scaring my wife." The FBI was more interested in his wife, because how did this Russian bride get out of Russia like almost immediately? This is like almost an impossible thing, okay? It takes a year just to get a visa approval to come to the United States for a married couple. It takes at least another year before that to get approval for a Russian to leave Russia, if at all. So they were more interested in how she got permission to leave Russia and whether she was actually a double agent. And like I said, there's been other people that have come forward and said that they had met her, Marina, while they're in Minsk, while they're in Moscow. Other Americans, other foreigners. So Marina was part of this Marina project where they had groups of girls, the KGB, they were either using prostitutes or they were using the daughters of KGB officials and Communist Party officials, and having them purposely go out and meet students, foreigners, defectors like Oswald, things like that, to find out information, pillow talk about were they legit, were they really there, because they loved the Soviet Union, or are they there spying, or they're just there to do whatever. They were keeping tabs on them. So, and again, all this that he says doesn't make a bit of sense, because if Oswald, has sent his wife back to Dallas in end of August, beginning of September 1963, he doesn't know that John Kennedy is going to be in Dallas in November of 1963. Okay? Now the CIA and people in the government, they know. And Kennedy doesn't even know that he's going to be going to that part of Dallas. All he knows he's making a Texas trip is going to be Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, but he doesn't know exactly where. And they're going to monitor all that, and they're going to manipulate Oswald into being there, and they're going to manipulate the limousine convoy to show up right there where they put Oswald, because they know Kennedy's going to pass somewhere through downtown. They know that Kennedy is going to have to get on the highway to go back to the trademark or back to the airport. So it has to be a building near there. There's only a few private buildings where someone like Oswald could get a job, because you've got the jail, you've got the sheriff's office, you've got all these other municipal buildings, you've got the post office. So nowhere in that area is there any place suitable except for the Texas School Book Depository. And D.H. Byrd is a big oil man. He owns that building. He's part of this right-wing group that's running this whole thing. Okay. And so Phillips manipulates Oswald. They gotta further create this, this thing showing he's a bona fide communist, because just passing out flyers and getting hit and arrested and going on radio talk shows in New Orleans is not enough. Okay? They got to put him in a foreign country, trying to get a visa to go to another country. Okay? Maybe as an escape or something. But see, it doesn't make any sense, because why in August is he trying to get a visa, okay, to go to Cuba, to transit to Russia, so he can come back and kill the president in Dallas? See, so what they're trying to, because people are not sophisticated enough to figure it out, they're trying to imply that he's trying to use Cuba and Russia after he kills the president to escape to Mexico City and do the whole thing again. This is what they're trying to imprint and imply ahead of time. They're also using him to shake up Russian, Soviet intelligence and Cuban intelligence. They're trying to figure out who's in charge, who's in the chain of command. They go down there and they get this crazy guy. He starts causing a lot of ruckus. They're going to start calling each other. They're going to start telexing each other. And the CIA and the NSA are going to monitor all that. And then they'll have a really good idea of, because you don't send telexes and phone calls to the janitor in the embassy. Okay? The head of security, counterintelligence, this guy right here, is going to send to his counterparts in Moscow. Same thing with the Cuban embassy. They're going to send to their counterparts in Cuba to get further instructions on how to deal with this guy. Okay? And anyway, so we'll keep going.
And during this talk, produced the gun, the revolver, and said that he needed and he keep it for his self-defense, self-protection.
And see, there's another thing. He's trying to show how he's trying to use the revolver to show how extreme he is. Now, think about it. You're going to go kill the President of the United States. There's going to be cops and Secret Service and sheriff all over the place chasing your ass. And you just did it from an open window in the 6th floor depository. And you're going to have to go down 6 flights of stairs to get out the back to escape. Now, he took the revolver all the way to Mexico City to the Soviet embassy, inside the Soviet embassy. But he doesn't take the fucking same revolver to work, to shoot his way out. Because everyone's looking up. They're smelling the gunpowder, and the police are rushing in. But he doesn't have the common sense to bring a revolver to shoot his way out to escape. He brought it to Mexico City, probably on instructions, but he doesn't have enough common sense to bring the revolver to work. First thing he did after the assassination was went home and got a new jacket and got his revolver. That tells you something there. But if he was going to kill the President of the United States, he didn't have the common sense to bring the revolver with him. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Action, because he is in danger, because he is afraid of his life. He didn't mention exactly who is menaced to his life. And during this talk, he insisted and he exposed that he needs the visa for our country, and that he wants to return and to live in peace in the Soviet Russia.
And again, it's been over. We got back in June of '62. It's now August, September of '63. It's been a little bit over a year. Why did he leave Russia in the first place? It took him almost 4 or 5 months just to get out of Russia. Okay? So why would he leave Russia in the first place if he wants to go back? Again, this story doesn't make any sense. It just, something's absolutely not correct here.
I didn't participate in this meeting. I was in next enclosed room, but when I entered the room before, he was talking with my two colleagues, Yatskov and Kostikov, and the gun was on the table before Lee Harvey Oswald. Their colleagues tried to calm him. Yatskov gave him a glass of water to take, and after some talks, from agitated state, from nervous tension, and from some very agitated movements, he began to be hysterical, began cry, and became in depression after this. So he wasn't when he prepared to leave their consular section, he just say that in case anybody would persecute him, he maybe use the gun. It was his phrase we remembered after, because at that day it was, for us it was nothing. So when he went away in the gate, Kostikov was the person who helped him to go away from the embassy. And in the gate, he tried to cover his face with a jacket and take the way to the right, outside the embassy. Now I just tell
And again, you got to figure, why would Oswald cover his face immediately coming out of that gate? Now remember, I've gone over the position of the cameras right across the street about 1, 2 o'clock. And so he knew to cover with his right hand, because that's going to cover your 1 o'clock, see? So if he's leaving the embassy and the camera's over here about 1 o'clock, his right hand would be here. He knew where the camera was at. Why didn't he use his left hand? He's right-handed, but if he's carrying that gun, or if he's got something else in there, but he knew to use his right hand to cover his face so he wouldn't be on the camera. He didn't cover with his left hand. He didn't put the whatever cover in front of him. And it's silly because anybody coming into the front gate anyway would have been taken, a picture would have been taken of them. But he knew that the CIA house they were taking pictures from was right across about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, across the street to the right. So I find that interesting. Maybe Maurice Bishop told him this. Maybe somehow he found out. But somehow he knew.
In some more short way, no? But in the book you can see it in details. Never we had doubts about the person who visited our embassy as a Lee Harvey Oswald. Because
also, I don't know if you remember my last video, this guy right here is an informant for the FBI. This is his translator that's walking around with him. He's actually being questioned by the FBI, and he's telling them everything about the guy that he does.
after
So I read the memo on that from the FBI.
assassination, we identified him by TV from Dallas, by direct transmission from Dallas. And he was actual Lee Harvey Oswald, who was considered as an alleged assassin of the president.
See, I don't know why a lot of people have a problem with this. I have no problem that it was Lee Harvey Oswald that was sent to Mexico City. I believe that was him. Now, there may have been other people running around the same time saying they were Lee Harvey Oswalds. I think a lot of those guys were in Dallas or New Orleans, but I have no doubt. And you got to think, why wouldn't Oswald go to the Russian, or they didn't have a Cuban embassy, but why didn't he go to Canada? It's not much further to Ottawa. But anyway, but I have no doubt that that was Oswald sent on a mission by Maurice Bishop down to Mexico City. And he was shepherded along the way by this Albert Osborne, this guy I'm going to get into eventually. And it's just crazy about Albert Osborne. Just absolutely insane. But anyway, we'll get into this here.
And as I remember, we discussed, Yatskov met with Asquith, Cuban consul at that time. And between them, they discussed these visits. And they have discussion about the same man. So it's possible to have different speculation.
So what he's saying is that they consulted with the Cubans, and they all agreed that the guy that came into the Russian embassy and the guy that came into the Cuban embassy was the same guy they saw on television in Dallas and who was shot in the basement. So it had to have been Oswald.
About the fact of visits. If the person who visited our embassy was imposter or actual imposter, I can say only that it was actual Oswald who visited our embassy. what about Cuban consulate? I just know that during meetings, as I said, between Yatskov and Askwer, there weren't doubts about the same person.
Thank you, Colonel.
Excuse me,
The colonel is convinced, I believe you're convinced, it was Lee Harvey Oswald who
Yes.
visited you.
yes.
And yet, I see such a different demeanor in this young man who is
Exactly.
so agitated and crying almost because he's being refused
He's acting.
immediate transit to Russia, and the calm demeanor of the man who was arrested for the crime of the century
Yep.
a couple of months later, and he tells his mother, don't believe the so-called evidence, and he tells his wife to be sure to buy baby shoes. There's just such a contrast. What do you think?
Yes. It also is very interesting because the way that the colonel described Oswald's behavior was the same way that Duran described his behavior. And yet Duran said that the man who came to the embassy, she has made different statements on that. But she called him blonde and short, which you, I can see, immediately disagree with, in her original description of him. And Asquith said categorically in front of the House Assassination Committee that the man shot in the basement of the Dallas Police Department and the man who came to his embassy were not the same person.
In 78.
I beg your pardon? Yes.
The only thing is that don't you think that the Russians and the Cubans would have photographic equipment inside their own embassies and video equipment inside their own embassies? They would have pictures of Oswald right there in the lobby, yelling and screaming at the service desk. You don't think that they'd have video of that? I'm pretty damn sure they would. But I think in the Russians and the Cubans' minds, it was the same guy. I believe it was the same guy. Now, like I said, there could be other people running around saying they're Oswald at the same time in Mexico City, in Dallas, in New Orleans. Anyway.
15 years, and he had, I think, 70 and more years old.
Yes. But there's another point there, and that is that you who told me earlier today that that embassy is covered by the surveillance cameras of the United States Intelligence Service
Yeah.
have no picture of Mr. Oswald going into the to the Russian embassy, and as a matter of fact, not into the Cuban embassy. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
And again, you got to figure out why. Why would the CIA deny that? Well, I got a very good reason. Because they know, after their own internal investigation, that their own guy, Maurice Bishop, David Atlee Phillips, set them up and sent Oswald down as a stringer. Okay? So they're trying to deny that it was Oswald, in a sense, by not showing. They panicked and they destroyed the photos and the videos.
Well, it's their responsibility of CIA station.
Yes, and also, I just thought to add, because we asked you earlier, that the Russian intelligence service did not have any photographic surveillance of any of the embassies in Mexico City. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Dayton?
No, the
Bullshit.
question I wanted to ask the Colonel is what, and it's total supposition on his part, why do you think there were no pictures of Oswald coming into the Russian embassy?
Huh.
Or do you believe that there
Why?
were?
Why?
There were.
I think it's, for me, it's very difficult to answer why. At that moment, I haven't some source in CIA station covered by American embassy. So I just can suggest or suppose why.
From your information, what were how were the cameras set up? How many cameras were there? Where were they placed? Could you tell us that?
I described today with Mr. Dorf where the observation post was organized by CIA station.
And you were familiar with them? You knew they were there at the time?
Yes, yes. And they used this during years, not only one, not only in front of our gates, but in other places, covering our garden. They're inside the territory of the embassy. But this observation post, again, in front of our gates, they used for taking the pictures of the people who entered and exit from there. And most of all, they used, as I know, taking the pictures with the people who wasn't by his face as Latin Americans, but they selected the visitors with the face of Americans or European type, no?
Would you say
So, so I cannot say why, or maybe they considered Lee Harvey Oswald as some Latin American people.
Gee, David Phillips wouldn't like that. No. One of the things that I think should be added to what you said is that while you said that you're unable to explain why they have no pictures, the CIA just said that the cameras weren't working that day.
Yeah.
And
It's
But you'll hear David Atlee Phillips says that one of the reasons he was there is on that same date that Oswald visits the Cuban embassy, they had coincidentally installed a pulse camera monitoring the gate, but they got no pictures of Oswald, supposedly. Anyway.
the explanation by David Atlee Phillips.
yes.
But you said that he was in deception area of war. So I cannot answer why. Or was distracted or something more, something other. Because David Atlee Phillips in his book,
With his Russian accent, it comes across as Deadly Phillips. Instead of David Atlee Phillips, it comes across as Deadly Phillips.
watch
Night watch. Night watch.
Night watch, yeah. Explained the mixture or mistake of the voice of
We're going to get to that.
which
one.
was taped by CIA station,
We're going to get to that.
and
one.
the picture of the man which we discussed there, which appeared in Warren Commission report. This supposed American former serviceman. So, but in other case, in other time, David Atlee Phillips said that other call was tapped, alleged Lee Harvey Oswald voice when he or imposter, I don't know, said during this call, I need to speak with military attaché from our country, and I need to ask, what about my information and your payment for this information for my trip to the USSR. It was, I consider it's very special, as we call it, active measure. Or the
So what he's saying is that David Atlee Phillips put a false statement in his book saying that Oswald was asking about the military attaché, you know, i.e. the person in charge of political assassinations. What about my ticket and my money back to the USSR after I killed the president?
exception, because it was, as appeared this description of this call appeared in other days when Oswald was in the United States.
Yes, after he had returned to the United States.
Yeah.
Moving right along to the next part of this, Duran reminded Oswald that the transit visa could not be issued until he supplied her with a visa from the country of final destination, in this case Russia, so Oswald departed.
All right, there we go. So that's enough of that right there. I'm going to write that down. Let's say 59, 57, and then we'll finish up with my embassy tour for about 15 minutes. We're going to go to the Iranian embassy we're in Canada, so in Ottawa. Okay, so we'll take a look at that. Hold on one second. All right, so this is the Embassy of the Islamic Republic of Iran in Ottawa, Canada. It says here it's permanently closed, although they got a great review. They got 5.0 review there. So let's take a look and see if we've got some photos here. Hold on one second. Okay, this just appears to be street view. So this is kind of a weird, cramped place to put an embassy. Huh. This looks like the back end of the embassy, actually. I don't know if this is the embassy here. Let's take a look. All right, hold on one second. Yeah, so I believe that this is the embassy. You see this gate here, but I'm not sure. Yeah, see, they got all this fencing. What is this across the street? All right, hold on one second. Let me take a look at something. Yeah, so it says here online that it's been permanently closed, and it's at 245 Metcalf, and this is Metcalf. We're at 249, so yeah, it was these two buildings here. So it's been permanently closed for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know why the Canadians would be closing the embassy. It's Canadian soccer, so it's got to be this building right here. But that's kind of an interesting setup. I don't know when they closed it, but yeah, you can see there's a big, what is that, a padlock or something on the gate. You see there's a little bit of debris. It's been closed for a while. You see the grass is not maintained. Maybe a couple of years. I don't know why it got closed, but apparently they shut it down. And maybe these other buildings are part of it. So, yeah, I don't know what the deal is with that, but apparently they're not there anymore. But again, you can see the basic setup. Standard security. You know. You see these bars, these are for in case a bomb goes off, because Iran's got enemies just like everyone else. So if the bomb goes off, it holds the glass in. That's why you have paper over the windows there. You got the fencing. This is probably the entrance for the consulate, or was. You see you got your standard cameras here. And then whoever's monitoring it would probably be in this building right here, although that's pretty well covered with trees. But you could also monitor it from the soccer building. But anyway, it's not a great one. That one in Mexico City, the Iranian embassy, is just like about a mile-long wall covered in ivy and security cameras everywhere. Huh. Interesting. All right. We'll go on till to the next one. And all right. And we'll follow up and go back to the timeline, the assassination timeline, and the testimonies. All right. Take care.